the time on PR pushback against the Democrats and the media. It is striking how the Ayatollah doesn't have to hire a PR firm. He's got the American news media to do the pushing for him. I'm kind of shocked by it all, and I realize I shouldn't be at this point, but I am. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the state of Georgia. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of the program today, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Obama administration officials and 6 Democratic Congress critters to talk about Iran. They had on 6 Republicans who would push back. The Republicans were all uniformly met with extreme criticism. A friend of theirs.
He was a war hero, the commander of Iran's feared Quds Force.
Qasem Soleimani was no ordinary general. The U.S. officially classified him as a terrorist, but in Iran, he was a national hero.
He's regarded as personally incredibly brave. The troops love him.
I was trying to think of somebody, and I was thinking of de Gaulle.
A revered figure in Iran and some other places in the Middle East.
Smart, charismatic, ruthless, strategic, and bold. His power made Iranians proud.
But even many of Soleimani's enemies admitted he was a military genius.
Qasem Soleimani was an evil genius.
Foreign legion, if you will.
By killing Qasem Soleimani, the U.S. has stripped Iran of an inspirational military leader.
The crowds are massive and emotional. There are many tears here.
Thousands of mourners on the streets in Iran. Symbolic caskets aloft, weeping and chanting, "I am Soleimani."
The supreme leader of Iran weeping and praying over a coffin draped in the Iraqi flag.
It's difficult to convey how revered he is.
There was talk in Iran Soleimani might be a future president, or perhaps even a supreme leader.
Okay, first of all, part of the montage I would take issue with slightly in that it is worth us understanding how the Iranians saw Soleimani. And I do think it is fair to say in Iran, a lot of people revered him. A lot of people did view him as a de Gaulle, things like that. That's not to offend you. It's to show you the prestige that the Iranian elite held him at it. But I think that's key because so much of the reporting has been on the Iranian people themselves. In fact, here's Foreign Policy Magazine. Let me read you this tweet. Went up last night at 7 o'clock. Americans painted him as a hardliner, but for Iranians, Soleimani was an apolitical patriot. An apolitical patriot. So the entire regime, apparently it's patriotic to be terroristic because that's what he did. Listen, the Washington Post, to their credit, is running an op-ed from Mashi Alinejad. Look, I'm butchering the name, and I grew up over there. Mashi forget it. An Iranian journalist. She's a women's rights campaigner. She is on Voice of America's Persian news service. And I want to read this to you. Part of it. The Iranian general killed by a U.S. drone strike. For anyone watching, I have one piece of advice. Don't take what you're seeing at face value. This past November, thousands of Iranians took to the streets across the country to protest against the regime in the biggest challenge to the clerical rule in 40 years. According to Reuters, more than 1,500 people were killed by security forces, including units of Soleimani's Revolutionary Guard. And at least 7,000 have been arrested. The internet was shut down for 5 days. Tehran has yet to release official figures of its own, which suggests the death toll may have been even higher. The as a shock to the regime, which portrays Soleimani as supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's adopted son. Of course, people across the political divide are concerned about war. Nobody wants President Trump to bomb Iran's cultural or historic sites as he threatened. I myself denounced the tweet. But what to make of the crowds of flag-waving mourners streaming across television screens? Without doubt, Soleimani had support among hardliners and regime loyalists. The regime is not taking any chances, though. In the city of Avaz, where large numbers of people turned out to mourn Soleimani, the government forced students and officials to attend. It provided free transport and ordered shops to shut down. According to videos sent to me by people inside the country, the authorities are making little kids write essays praising the fallen commander. First graders who didn't know how to write were encouraged to cry for Soleimani. Some Iranians have compared the funeral service for Soleimani to those held for the Nazi leader Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher of Prague, killed by Allied agents during World War II. Soleimani was not a benign official. In 1999, he was among the Revolutionary Guard leaders who demanded that then-President Mohammad Khatami crush university student demonstrations or face consequences. Current Supreme Leader Khamenei praised Soleimani for his staunch defense of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, who has killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. Few Syrians are mourning him. The media in the Islamic Republic is heavily controlled. Public gatherings are allowed only if they are pro-regime. Critics are jailed or shot. Even I, living outside the country, have received a death threat over the coverage of Soleimani's killing. So it's not hard to use all the tools and resources of the state to stage a funeral procession. I have more than 4 million followers on various social media networks, and I've received thousands of messages, voicemails, and videos from Iranians in cities such as Shiraz, Isfahan, Tehran, and even Avaz, who are happy about Soleimani's death. Some complain of the pressure to attend services for him. There are many Iranian voices who think Soleimani was a war criminal, but Western journalists rarely reach out to them. Ironically, the Western media is more skeptical of such state-organized events in other countries, such as Russia or North Korea, but seem to leave its critical sense at the border when it comes to the Islamic Republic. While it's true that Western correspondents face daunting conditions when it comes to reporting the truth from Iran, that shouldn't excuse the many times we've shown unwarranted gullibility towards the official version of events. Remember all the articles that predicted how Iranians were going to unite in resistance to Donald Trump's sanctions. The same analysts who missed November's protest are now predicting Iranians will rally around the flag. This sorely underestimates the anger and resentment over the crackdown. The authorities forced many families to pay blood money in order to receive the bodies of their loved ones from the morgue. Some even had to sign official forms waiving the right to hold a public funeral as a condition of getting bodies returned. 2 weeks ago, the parents and 9 other family members of Puya Bakhtiri, a 27-year-old citizens of security forces, used armor cars, water cannons, and even helicopters to deploy to stop mourning ceremonies for some of the victims. Those families are not mourning Soleimani. In 2009, the Revolutionary Guards led the crackdown on the so-called Green Movement protests against the disputed presidential election. Many of the mothers of those killed in 2009 and 2017 and 2019 are rejoicing about Soleimani's death. How do I know? Because they've sent me videos of themselves speaking to the camera, dancing, or sharing cakes and sweets. This is a journalist with a huge following inside Iran. The American government allows her to broadcast on the Voice of America Persian service. American media outlets covering live the events in Iran. Now, full disclosure here, you do need to understand, and in defense of one of the criticisms I'm seeing of the media, Martha Raddatz and others are wearing their heads covered in typical garments in Iran. That is not them being respectful. They are required by law to do it. There's no exception for Westerners in Iran. If you're a Western female journalist going to Iran, you have to cover your hair. It is the law there. You will go to jail otherwise. They don't care that you're an American. So don't attack the media for doing that. But what is striking is the coverage of the media in Iran. They are taking the talking points of the Iranian regime at face value. You know, the media has spent 72 hours blowing up President Trump for suggesting we might target cultural sites in Iran. War crime, war crime. I mean, they've lost their minds. This is a hypothetical thing that will be carried out by the American military that will pick the targets. The President of the United States is not going to pick the targets. They will explain to him that it is a war crime if he were to blow up certain cultural sites. For example, the prophet Daniel is buried in Iran. His shrine is known. His burial place is known. It is a huge deal to both Iranians and to Jews and Christians who live in Iran. Believe it or not, there are lots of Jews and Christians there. We would not blow that up. That would be a war crime under the Geneva Convention. That wouldn't be targeted. There are plenty of other things, though, that would be targeted, military, political alike. Well, the Iranians are coming out now saying that one of their targets may be Arlington National Cemetery. You do not hear the same American media screaming about Donald Trump, screaming about the Iranians. In fact, they're giving fawning coverage to the Iranians. You've got CNN in complete damage control for the Obama legacy. Again, 13 Obama administration officials in one or two circumstances. You had the daughter of Valerie Jarrett and Jim Scudo, who was CNN used to be attacked as the Clinton News Network. Listen, I've got a lot of friends at CNN. I worked there for 3 years. There are a lot of good people there. Some of them you would hate and think are liberals. I actually think are pretty fair journalists. But this is embarrassing for the Trump administration for daring to kill a man who killed almost 1,000 American soldiers. And yet they are. The media is embarrassing themselves. You know who's almost as embarrassing as the media?
Put us on the path to another war.
He's been
safer today than we were before Donald Trump acted.
We seem to have accomplished what Soleimani was trying to do but couldn't. So in death, he's actually accomplished his goal.
An enormous escalation. Let me tell you that over and others within the intelligence community saying there wasn't enough intelligence to justify this attack. Now, you know enough already to know that people like the whistleblower in the intelligence community have this administration. I've never been one to believe in the deep state or what. And there were a series of people who came out into the media and said, actually, there wasn't enough intelligence to do this. There wasn't enough intelligence to justify this. We really don't know what Soleimani was doing. And the National Security Agency, the National Security Council, and others are doing the same thing on background. And you know the media reaction? Well, you have to go on record. So they'll let the sources out. You do not have to be a military from the New York Times that supposedly undermines Trump's justification. There is one detail that no one needs. What evidence did we have? Soleimani was planning something, and it was so big he was going to have to fly. You do not have to be a genius. You do not have to be an expert. You do not have to be in the military. You do not have to be in the intelligence community to understand that's a really big freaking deal. Forces he has assigned in Iraq, and then has to go back to the 14 attacks on Americans in Iraq. In addition to attacks now in Kenya on Americans, the 9/11 Commission report says the Iranian leadership, that would have been Soleimani, allowed al-Qaeda to float in and out of a regime that oversaw the killings of thousands of Americans. Why is the American media derangement syndrome goes deep in the American media these days? Against a terrorist regime that has killed thousands of Americans by taking out a man who himself is responsible for killing over in 2020. They can't play this straight. They've got to do what they can to help the Democrats. And to help the Democrats, ironically, they got to help the Iranians. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson. I promise I will send a recipe this week. It's one I've sent in the past, and I've gotten a bunch we've had several pound cake recipes in our house that we've used, and this has become we don't have to subscribe again. But if you're not subscribed and you want the recipe list, the list, it doesn't get sold. I'm not going to give the list to anyone. You're not going to get a bunch of text messaging. The number that you 33777. What'll happen is you will get back a text asking for me after you send that, saying here are all the other recipes I've sent in the past. And there's plenty of stuff still to talk about Iran, but this is such a terrible idea, and it is. The U.S. government on Monday launched a pilot program to collect DNA. Will be subject to DNA collection. The information would go into a massive criminal database and held indefinitely, as well as asylum seekers and people entering the country without authorization, refusing to submit DNA. I'm not opposed to it if it's an hand over their DNA, should be unconstitutional. And you should be opposed to it. Y'all, United States has become. I'm totally down with him cracking down on crime. I think it's a good thing. We should crack down on crime. We should. But the federal government itself, states, not the federal government. In a database? No, this is a horrible idea. You should oppose it. CNN has a state sponsor of terrorism. The United States is a state sponsor of terrorism, according to him. Why is CNN typically is I get up every morning between 6 and 6:30. I look through, get all the different sound bites I think would be useful for the show. It kind of aggravates Charlie to some degree because I get all the sound as opposed to doing the show and then finding the sound bites to go with it. But it's more efficient for me to do it that way. Yeah, I've talked about this. I want to circle back to this. I'm going to go off script. I don't actually write it. You know, there are some radio show hosts. I'll give you a secret. There are some radio show hosts who have people write monologues for them. You think I'm making it up, and I'm not. There are some radio show hosts out there who will have someone write a monologue. Her side job, her side gig, was she wrote monologues for than someone who reads a script, but I don't want a script. I want to be flexible. Don't want to be bound to a script. You can tell, though. Typically, you will hear them say the instead of the. When you're talking at a casual pace and you hear someone talking and they're talking about the dog, they say the dog. They don't say the dog. The instead of the. But when you're reading from something, you tend to pronounce words differently. And when you're listening to someone on radio and it sounds like they're reading, they're probably reading. Like I read you part of that Washington Post piece. You could tell I was reading it from the cadence of my voice that I want to talk about. And I'm going to completely diverge. This isn't even on the outline of stuff I was going to talk about. But here we go with a devil may care attitude. I tweeted this morning when I got up. The worldview that is highly secular and highly progressive is good for us. And in that elite worldview of secular progressivism in the United States, abortion on demand is a good thing. Drug culture really isn't bad. Everything is predicated on race in this country. And we are the globes a lot. You know, when I was at Fox, let me back up. So back in 2009, CNN, Mr. right-hand man. So I went to Bill Shine at Fox, and he said, listen, we'd love to have you. We're not going to pay you as much as what CNN's going to pay you, but you'll be safe here as opposed to at CNN. And he made the point. He said, you know, the difference between CNN and MSNBC and Fox is that Fox pays attention to what people within 100 miles of a river valley pay attention to, and people at CNN and MSNBC it's that they pay attention to people in the heartland, and CNN and MSNBC, they're in this bubble of people along the coast that's highly liberal. So one of the Golden Globes and the Oscars, and at Fox, they will rarely ever cover it unless something happens that's in your face to progressive secularists on the coast. And sure enough, there has been inordinate coverage of the monologue where he was in your face to the left in Hollywood, joking about their friendships with Jeffrey Epstein, joking about that they're less educated than Greta Thunberg, who herself isn't very educated. She dropped out of school, and on it goes. Well, it's insulting Hollywood. I actually saw a piece at Slate. It's a Slate take, so you do understand it's somewhat dumb. But it basically began that the climate is changing horrifically. It's a somber mood at the Golden Globes. And in comes Ricky Gervais to insult everyone to their face. Wah, 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 wah. The whole going, see, I'm going off my outline. That can sometimes be a problem. There are two worlds in which we live. There's reality, for example, that abortion is without consequence. So when Michelle, Williams or whoever, the actress, stood up at the Golden Globes in defense of abortion and how she couldn't have been successful had she not killed her child. And by the way, I've seen people in Hollywood pushing back on those of us pointing out that's killing a child. You're killing a child. You are killing a human being when you commit an abortion. Let's not dance around it and give it euphemisms like abortion. It is a child. It is a human being in an early developmental stage, and you have chosen to kill it. and the media saying something that the rest of the crowd and the media agree with. I am sorry, when the hell did bravery in this country become that you tell people what they want to hear? It's so brave! Donald Trump's a garbage human being that is standing on stage at the Golden Globes and talking about how killing my kid helped me be successful. It's so brave. Half the people in the room, including some of the men, have done it too. How is it brave? Hey, you can't judge me on that men part because they might identify now. You never know. This is the way the American media shapes the news these days. It's not about what's true. We're in a post-truth America. It's not about what's right. Who can tell you right or wrong when you're in a morally relative society? What it is essentially the defense of their worldview, that a secular elite in this country is wise and great and everyone else is not. So, for example, the March for Our Lives nonsense, who is funding this shadowy group on the right? Turns out that 95% of the money for the March for Our Lives anti-gun group cause came from people who gave over $100,000. Now you're questioning the shadowy elite shaping the anti-gun movement. No, you're not going to hear that because the media agrees with it. CNN is going to have on all the Obama administration officials, even being interviewed by former Obama administration officials who are now CNN employees, about how great the Iran deal was and how bad Donald Trump is, because it's their worldview. There are people on the right who feel very much the same way these days. It is all in defense of their own precious. Donald Trump can do no wrong and he can't be questioned. There are real screw-ups that do have to be examined, though. There are real facts. And unfortunately, the Pentagon has made a very big screw-up. The Pentagon, until the Joint Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came out and said the letter was a draft and wasn't meant to be sent to Iraq. Yeah, they screwed that one up. And so now, of course, the secular elite and the media are saying, they screwed this up. How do we know they got the intelligence right on Soleimani? How do we know? How can we be sure? The Obama administration officials tell us it was a bad idea, and we believe them. We used to have a time in this country where the Republic newspaper or the Republican newspaper, the Democrat newspaper, and you had party organs, and those were newspapers. And a cable organ and the Republican news organ, they could both run, and that would play it straight. And now the press, those Republican news organs have largely gone away. The Democratic news organs have propped up, and the Associated Press has gone in with. And you, as a person who is middle class, who goes out, you're a woman, and you get an abortion, and they never tell you about the devastating psychological consequences of getting an abortion. The number of women in this country who believe that they can be carefree and get an abortion and are overcome with guilt afterwards, who deeply regret it. You don't hear about the women who became pro-life after having had their abortion. You never hear those stories in the media. You never hear the stories about the woman who was told that she needed to have an abortion because her child was going to be deformed and she doesn't have the abortion and the child is just fine. You never hear those stories in the media because the media, the secular elite, believe abortion on as a brave truth teller because she told everybody in the crowd and on CNN and MSNBC exactly what they already believe. They herald the people from the Obama administration coming in and saying that the Iranians are good and the Americans are bad because they already believe it. Consumers, by a group of people who blame the United States for being aggressors, believe that abortion, it is reflected on a daily basis in the press. And that is why so many in the media with a straight face can come out and treat this funeral procession in Iran as if it's legit and do their best to ignore an op-ed. It's not a reported story, even though it's true. It's got to be someone in an op-ed. And the rest of the media can say, well, this is just an op-ed. It's not a news story. We're not going to use an op-ed to shape the news because that's opinion. Meanwhile, all you get in the press is opinion these days. These people, they don't like us, do they? Now, to be fair, there are some who want to tell the truth, who want to tell you the facts, who don't want to tell you what to think. They just want to give you enough information so you can think for yourself. They really do exist. They're just increasingly in the minority. They are increasingly what we're seeing as people coming from left-wing think tanks and left-wing journalistic organizations into the mainstream media. NBC News, their political editor, they just hired someone to be a policy editor for their political division. He's from a left-wing news organization. Guess what? The NBC, I mean, it's not the feedback loop of the left, and they're mad as hell at you for not believing it, and that's why they drip with contempt for Fox News, because Fox News dares to tell people they're seeing something that needs to be destroyed, that it needs to be something to be modeled after, but they can't do that, because to do that, they would have to accept that their worldview is wrong, and they can never do that.
I really do like his opinion on things.
To 33777 now.
You should text recipe to 33777. I will be sending out the pound cake recipe. Those of you watching online, there is an internet issue we are having today. The president has decided to start his campaign earlier than other presidents have started, earlier than Obama. You need to understand that people don't seem to appreciate about President Trump on the campaign trail. He thrives on the campaign trail. The president come to believe it's good for his mental health to be out there connected to the crowd, feeding off the energy of the crowd. He is an extrovert. He does not like to be cooped up in the White House, and so he's headed off on the campaign trail. We will be hearing lots about that, and I guarantee you the media spin is going to be, oh, he's desperate. He's desperate. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars more than any of them have on hand, and he's going to use it all to the best of his ability. Yang is the Democratic candidate, the Asian guy, and apparently for all of the Democrats who blast Republicans and say Republicans just think all black people, Peacock Network, maybe peacocks think all Asians look alike. They have, all three of them have shown graphics in the last couple of months. The latest comes Asian people. CNBC actually put up a picture of a donor, venture capitalist in San Francisco. And yeah, he's just another rich Asian dude with the last name Yang. Although the same graphic had a picture of Kristen Gillibrand for Tulsi Gabbard. But they've done this to Yang now. Andrew Yang, that the next Democratic debate is going to be all white people again. This is the striking thing, honestly, about the Democratic situation. This goes back to the entire narrative of this hour on the media and a secular elite controlling what you should, the party of old white dudes. Meanwhile, in 2016, office, Marco Rubio was there, Ted Cruz was there, Ben Carson was there, and others. You have in the Republican Party right now Nikki Haley, Bobby. Democratic Party these days increasingly is, are you gay or are you straight? and as long as you're white, you're okay. The Republican Party actually takes diversity of ethnicity and way more monolithically white than the Republican Party is, at least at the leadership level. It is true that Hispanic and black voters tend to overwhelmingly be Democrat. You are increasingly out to lunch on these issues and increasingly unrepresentative of the people. But you look at the ethnic and racial diversity of the Republican Party. Hispanic leaders in this country were Republican. You would never know that from the media. The media constantly attacks the Republicans on diversity issues while ignoring the lack of diversity on the Democratic side. You have an entire media that has just like the black voters of the Democratic Party and the women of the Democratic Party are going to go with the old white dude Joe Biden to be the nominee. And of course, the media looks at all that and thinks it's hunky-dory. If it was on the Republican side, they would be bashing it nonstop. The hypocrisy in the diversity arguments in the press is astounding, and they can never see it. I'll remember one time on CNN, I pointed out when I was at CNN that the Republican Party had more statewide elected Hispanic people and minorities than the Democratic Party. You had Nikki Haley, you had Bobby Jindal, you had Susana Martinez, you were getting Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and it was like heads exploded. And it was a true statement. I was factually right. And none of them could concede the fact that I was factually right because they were so invested in the narrative that the Democrats are more diverse. tell you people that I'm a professional and occasionally I do things where I'm thinking, oh, that's such an amateur thing, like putting part of a protein bar in my mouth before we come back from commercial break. I'm sitting here swallowing, hoping not to choke and die in front of the live stream, among other things. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. I'm sure you wanted to know that. I'm so professional. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K. That actually translates into the phone number, 877-973-7425. You can watch on social media. I think maybe we figured out the internet live streaming issue. Maybe we'll have a more stable feed this hour. We will see. We need to talk about the Australian wildfires, please. I realize there's plenty of domestic stuff we can talk about here. There's plenty of Georgia stuff, but I keep putting these things off, and I mentioned it very briefly yesterday. Want to start here this hour with the climate change stuff in Australia and the Australian wildfires. We have heard the stories and seen the footage of the wildfires in Australia now for several weeks, and they are awful. But the American media and the global media is doing itself no favors when it comes to this coverage, and I think are actually working against their interests. The entire, I'm going to use French here now, raison d'etre, the entire reason for being for so much of this coverage is to convince you that climate change is real and we've got to do something about it. And they have highlighted all of the fires in Australia and the billions of animals killed. By the way, a good friend of mine who is both a scientist and a statistician says you should not believe the numbers they're talking about of the mass casualty deaths of the animals. They really have no idea. And most of those numbers are more likely than not exaggerated for sympathy to impact the climate change agenda. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually, while I am skeptical that scientists are accurately stating the role that humans play in shaping and changing the climate, and I do think the climate changes historically over time, I also do think that there are 7 billion of us on the planet. We clearly play a role. But I think there's a political agenda involved in most of the climate change discussions we have that causes people like me to be extremely skeptical of most of what we hear, and we have every reason to. And the Australian wildfire situation is the latest reason that we should be skeptical. We have heard now for weeks on end, that the fires were caused by climate change. Apparently, there are over 200 people in Australia named climate change. That must be their legal names because over 200 people in Australia have now been arrested for arson related to starting the wildfires. Now, how can it be that the wildfires were caused by climate change and they've arrested over 200 people for causing the wildfires? How can that be? If I were a reasonable person who was willing to buy into the notion of climate change as the media portrays it, what I would tell you is that Australia is facing, this is Australia's dry period. Historically, it's his dry period. And it is drier than normal and has been for some time. And part of that has to do with local devastation of deforestation and urban growth, creating heat islands that have impacted the local climate, that have caused things to dry out further. So when arsonists strike, there is less water and less rain and less moisture to be able to stop the fires. That would be the argument I would make. That would be a credible argument. That would be an article and that would be an argument that someone like me could believe, that someone like you could believe. Listen, you know it's true. Even if you don't believe in climate change, you understand that when you have more asphalt, it acts as a heat island, a heat sink, and retains heat in areas. Now, the feedback loop tends to be that you then have afternoon thunderstorms. We see this in Atlanta. We see this in Macon, where I am. See it in Macon all the time. Yeah, I'll be on Bass Road where I am. Those of you familiar with Middle Georgia, I'll be on the road. I've seen it in Athens. I've been up in Athens, and I've seen this, where you'll see a big thunderhead over part of the city. You'll be able to see the rain coming down. It's that one thunderhead. It is a heat island effect, where the heat island causes a feedback loop with the climate and the atmosphere, where then a rainstorm pops up over that heat island and cools it down. It is a part of a natural cycle. We see this in Atlanta, where so many surface temperatures are higher in cities. And in fact, weather monitoring stations that show increases in temperature, many of those were in rural areas are now in urban areas. And of course, the asphalt around where those thermometers are impacted by that. We see that in the world. And in Australia, they have a situation where this feedback loop of the afternoon thunderstorms to be able to cool down the areas that have gotten hot, because they've been in a drought, there isn't enough moisture to get that feedback loop generating. So when someone does cause arson and does create wildfires, there's no rain to then come and put out the fires, and they spread. There are ways to explain this story that can get buy-in from people who are otherwise skeptical of the media headlines. And instead of the media going in that direction, the media has tried to convince you that climate change itself struck the match. Climate change itself caused the fires in Australia. We now know that is not true. Even the Australian media that is totally in on the climate change agenda has had to scale it back down, walk it back, and point out that the overwhelming number of these fires have been sparked by arson. In fact, the initial fires were sparked by arson. Other fires then spread from the sparks and embers that floated on the breeze and caused new fires. But the genesis of it was not climate change, unless the person who struck the match was named climate change. ABC News has an image of Australia superimposed on the United States. And it shows roughly 2/3 of Australia consumed in fire right now. When you actually click on the story and read it, it says that the fires burning in Australia are twice the size of Maryland. Last I checked, looking at a map of the United States, Maryland is not 2/3 of the United States. Now, what the graph actually intended to show is that the areas of Australia that have been impacted by wildfires this year. But that's not what they suggested the graphic showed. They suggested from the graphic that all of Australia, 2/3 of Australia was in fire right now, and that would have covered 2/3 of the United States roughly. And then when you click in, it says basically only twice the size of the state of Maryland. The media is willfully being dishonest. The media routinely mocks conservatives for not believing in climate change. And then the media runs stories like this that give everyone reason to doubt what the media is saying. And the media blames you and not itself for doing that. Very much like the Iran situation. The media is highlighting Iranian talking points because the narrative is that Orange Man bad. And because Orange Man bad, the media has to focus on Iran and the talking points from Iran and not the president. Now, it's not just them. You've got one of the I think it was, what was it? Was it Colbert? I can't remember. You had Jane Fonda come out. She climbed off her communist tank to go into the studio.
You know, I've spent a lot of time now with these young students, and they're scared. And a lot of young people are even suffering from, they're calling it extinction illness. And I just felt I wasn't doing enough, and the scientists were saying we have 10 years, and before it's going to go so far over the cliffs that there's no turning back. We'll just, the environment and climate will unravel, and there's nothing we can do. And so I said, okay, I'm famous, I have a platform, I'm going to move to D.C., I'm going to put my body on the line, and I'm going to do these things, and in the process I'm going to learn a lot too. And the young people have been with me all the way, and it's incredible what's happened.
She feels young again. Extinction illness, folks. This is the new thing, extinction illness. They really believe we have 10 years left. Now, never mind that they've been telling us we had 10 years left for the last 30 years. That, again, is part of the problem. You have a bunch of scared young people who really believe the world is going to come to an end. Do you know what's going to happen in 10 years? A lot of the kids who are freaked out right now and think we have 10 years left are going to wake up and realize, wait a second, I've been lied to. But a great many of them, if we're really honest about it, a great many of them are going to say, oh, we must have 10 more years and it's all over. Because by then they will be so lived in the dogma of climate change, they won't be able to change their mind. They'll just change the date of our extinction. And they've been telling us this for 30 years. Again, this is another reason why so many people don't believe it. The media gets the climate change stories wrong, the wildfire stories wrong, the dates of our extinction wrong. This is a religion. It has all the hallmarks of a religion. Listen, I'm going to play the Jane Fonda clip again. And I want you to listen to the emotion in her voice. This is the emotion of religious fervor in her voice.
You know, I've spent a lot of time now with these young students, and they're scared. And a lot of young people are even suffering from, they're calling it extinction illness. And
extinction illness. They're suffering from it. It's emotional distress caused by a bunch of adults lying to them. That's what extinction illness is. But now listen to her as she gets worked up about moving to D.C. and hanging out with these kids. Listen to it.
I just felt I wasn't doing enough, and the scientists were saying we have 10 years, and before it's going to go so far over the cliff that there's no turning back. We'll just, the environment and climate will unravel, and there's nothing we can do. And so I said, okay, I'm famous. I have a platform. I'm going to move to D.C. I'm going to put my body on the line, and I'm going to do these things, and in the process I'm going to learn a lot too, and the young people have been with me all the way, and it's incredible what's happened.
It's incredible what's happened. This is a religious fervor. It is a secular religion that worships creation instead of worshiping the Creator. It has rotted their minds. It is Moloch. We've got to abort kids and curtail large families. They're bad. You know, the God of the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. Moloch says, hey, come kill your kids and I'll make it rain. And that's essentially what the left is doing. They are protesting around the world, claiming that the world is coming to an end. The world is not going to come to an end in 10 years. The planet will still be here. We will still be here. The environment will still be here. Might it be warmer? It may very well be warmer. But the same people who believe in evolution and the adaptability of the human species suddenly believe we can't adapt to this. You've got an entire country, the Netherlands, that has learned to cope with and live being below sea level. The sea levels rise. Why can't the rest of us learn to live below sea level? Why can't the rest of us adapt? Why can't we move? They don't want to explore those things. They really believe we're all going to die in 10 years. Do you know, there's a level of apocalyptic rhetoric in some Christian circles these days, but do you know Jesus Christ can't come back tomorrow? Scripture says that we do not know the day that Jesus will return, but we can be certain he's not going to come back tomorrow. You're all going to tune in here again tomorrow because you're not going to heaven tomorrow unless you keel over dead today and you're a believer. The reason I can say that with certainty is that there are a series of prophecies in the Bible that have to be fulfilled before the second coming can come. And there are Christians around the world working tirelessly to fulfill those prophecies, one of which is the spreading of the gospel to all corners of the planet. And there are still people in the world who've never had the chance to experience the gospel. You go to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and they show you all of the languages still existing that have not yet had a translation of the Bible that they're working to raise money to translate the Bible in. And that number is decreasing every year. A friend of mine says, you know, in the next 35 years, it is possible that the Bible will be translated into every single language and the gospel spread to every corner of the earth. And then we can start saying any day now he's coming back. But until that prophecy is fulfilled, that the gospel is spread to all corners of the world, to all languages and tribes, Jesus can't come back. He's not coming back tomorrow. We don't know when. We know there will be a last day, and those on his side will be on the winning team. But the way the left speaks, they speak with apocalyptic certainty. I can't speak with apocalyptic certainty. The Bible says there are some things we do not know. There are secrets God keeps we can't know. One of those is when the last day will come. But the media and the celebrity culture out there tells us that the last day is coming in 10 years. The gig is up in 10 years. We're all going to die. And the people who believe that are deeply malcontented souls. And I got to ask the question, if you really believe the world is going to come to an end in 10 years, and now you believe Donald Trump has started a war with Iran that is going to prevent us from focusing on climate change tasks necessary to prevent the apocalypse 10 years from now, what are you going to do about it? You're going to show up in Washington, D.C. and get yourself arrested? What are you really going to do? We're breeding a generation of children who are being told the world is coming to an end in 10 years. At what point does this turn violent? Greta Thunberg has already had to apologize for talking about putting politicians with their backs against the wall. The rhetoric's only going to heat up from here because it is apocalyptic religious fervor from a sect of people that don't even believe in God. They just worship creation.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Erick Erickson, the information you need.
The phone number, if you would like to be a part of the program today, we actually do take your phone calls here. Our phone lines are open, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. A friend of mine, I hate it when the Wall Street Journal forgets my login. There are a few news organizations that I do manage to keep subscriptions to, and the Wall Street Journal is one of them because it's a good newspaper, even though it has some biases. But I am, come on. A buddy of mine sent me this link to the story, and it's relevant to something I wanted to talk about. Yes, here we go. More state houses are wading into the contentious debate over the participation of transgender athletes in men's and women's sports. In recent weeks, Republican legislators in at least 5 states have drafted measures aimed at preventing athletes from competing in categories different than their biological sex. Lawmakers say they are specifically concerned about female athletes facing unfair competition. The bills, introduced or pre-filed in New Hampshire, Washington, Georgia, Tennessee, and Missouri, reflect growing attention around the issue of whether transgender rights protections are leading to unfair competition in women's sports. Policies regulating the eligibility of transgender high school athletes are usually set by school associations and vary. In about a third of states, transgender athletes can freely compete on teams of the gender they identify with, according to transathlete.com, which tracks these policies. Like the National Collegiate Athletic Association, that would be the NCAA, some high school associations allow transgender females to participate in girls' teams if they meet certain conditions, such as completing a period of testosterone suppression treatment or gender reassignment surgery. Several other states lack formal guidelines. Now, one of the interesting things I've noticed about these conversations, we don't really ever hear about trans men competing against men. Now, why is that? I'm sure they're there, but they don't really get the attention, do they? It's most often it is men who've decided they're women who are competing against other women, or boys who are competing against girls. And there is still, more often than not, a musculature, skeletal, and hormonal advantage to the boy who's decided he's a girl, to the man who's decided he's a woman. We are so wrapped up these days in the United States and in a lot of Western societies on the whole idea of men and women are equal. By the way, I am told by friends of mine in Europe that this is actually a fairly distinctly American thing these days, that even places like Sweden and France and Germany have decided it's a bunch of hooey. And in this country, we are uniquely obsessed with. We've got nothing better to care about now. The world's coming to an end in 10 years, and we're squabbling over whether or not boys should be able to compete with girls. And you got more than half of society, cultural society, I guess, the voices in society insist that the boys should be able to compete against the girls as long as they put on a wig or grow out their hair or do something to pretend that they're actually a girl. How is it fair? Phillips in the Peachtree City, Noonan area got elected in a special election. The establishment was out to get him. They didn't get him. He won. He has prepared legislation, pre-filed it, that would prohibit boys from competing in high school sports, decide they want to play on the girls' team or beating the girls, because they do have unfair physical advantages. Men and women are not equal. Maybe before the law they are, and they should be, but physically, biologically, they're not. And pretending otherwise is kookiness.
for daily in-depth news and analysis.
A friend of mine listening to the program sent me pictures seen at Target. Oh, Lord. It is, gosh, who even superhero stuff? There is some kit called Creatable World. Create your own. And this unisex model, it then comes with a series of wigs, so you can give it long hair or short hair. You can give it a, quite honestly, prepubescent girl, and I wouldn't exactly think that these things are flying off the shelves. Figure this out here. We're going down the rabbit hole. Creatable. That's who makes it. Let's see how this is. Wow. In our world, dolls are as limitless as the kids who play with them. Introducing Creatable World, a doll line designed to keep labels out and invite everyone in, giving kids the freedom to create their. It's a blank canvas to create their own character. Switch from long hair to short hair. Add a skirt, pants, or both. Create your characters. Oh, good gracious. So this is, wow. I post Hello Giggles, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, NBC, Forbes, Time, Adweek. They've all been selling them, and I'm sure it will be much, and pretty going to get super praised by the media. But how many people are actually going to buy this stuff? It's funny to me, our gender. You don't have to be a boy. Even though you have boy parts, you can actually, they don't actually have kids. Here's the thing I have found. We did not. I've got two kids. Are defined, as the left would say, but they gravitated to those things. Major publications, because they're offensive to major publications and the thought at major publications. But time and time again, you see these things. I saw one in the Wall Street, wanted their children to pick for themselves. They didn't wear, their daughters never wore pinks. They played with gender neutral toys, used the dump trucks as baby dolls, and over time they gravitated towards their own. And the woman, it was like the scales had fallen off her eyes. Like Saul, I mean, the mom is looking and she's like, hey, turns out girls are girls and boys are boys. You know, my wife had a Barbie doll when she was little, and she used it as a shovel. She did. She used it till the legs fell off. She wanted to play outside in the mud with the boys. And that's perfectly fine. Boys. Some boys are mama's boys. They want to stay in the house with mom, and they want to do things that mom does, and they relate to mom, and that's perfectly fine. Gay and straight to transgender and non-binary and straight. And so things that when kids were little that they would, baby dolls, maybe he's gay, to now it's maybe he thinks he's a girl and we should encourage him to be a girl. The whole world has lost its damn. As a parent, one of the most difficult things in life is not to put my own biases on my kids. I actually use in my faith or the way to eternal life with your God. I should want my kids to have an eternal salvation or share my values, because I do believe it provides a path to eternal salvation for them. But as far as forming their political views and their living, the last thing I want to do at night is argue politics with my family. One of the greatest pet peeves in my life these days, my family want to call and talk politics. I talk on the radio literally 5 hours, 5 days a week. Number is 877-973-7425. You can call in here and talk to me about these issues. Unless you're my family, don't call me on the show. Not mom, sorry, love you, but they should be able to form a worldview based on those values. Now, you can say that's indoctrination, but every single last one of you listening does it yourself, whether you're liberal or conservative. The big issue is I want them to be able to make up their own mind on individuals and public policy shaped by their worldview. What we see is that kids are not automatons, and they're not empty vessels into which we pour everything in. There is an environment that shapes them. There is nurturing that shapes them. There are genetics that shape them. But inevitably, girls tend to be girls with mom, or your little girl wants to be outside playing in the mud. Suddenly, she must really want to be a boy, or he must really want to be a girl. It used to be, he must be gay. Kids, I'm shocked by the number of people who think that kids at a very young age can be treated for gender. And this is the world we live in. the inmates are running the asylum. And, so this is one of my and it sends me off on wild tangents. That's why you should listen. You never, ever know what I'm going to do. My entire team sets out looking at this outline. I said, at this point in the show, he should be talking about this topic. It's running the asylum, and people are obsessed with their own social agendas. And they are trickling it in through school and indoctrination of kids. And one of my big critiques of the church in the United States right now, Buddy Rod Dreher has written a book, The Benedict Option, and I don't fully subscribe to his idea, but there is an aspect of it that I think is necessary. And it's one, frankly, I've been really bad with because I travel so much, and I hate people, so I hate to associate with large crowds of people. But every single person on planet Earth has something dwelling within them that says this isn't all there is. Every single person are theologians. And he's got a very close relative in his to make him an atheist. Something has closed his mind to God. Because every single person, particularly something more than this. It is not that we live, we die, and the worms eat us, and the circle of life continues. There's something. And there are competing views of what that voice is. There are competing views. And, in liberal theology these days, we talked yesterday about the crack up of the United Methodist Church, where essentially, as the Babylon Bee put it, they're therapeutic, just be good, live your life, do good things to others, make heaven on earth, never mind that we're all sinners and it's impossible. Your purpose on this planet is to glorify God in all that you do. Your work, there is a doctrine of vocation within Christianity that when you work, the purpose of your whatever you are, your goal in life is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. It is to reflect God in what you do. And that is your purpose. And increasingly in a muddled society where people tell you that little voice in purpose, that little voice in your head that says, no, it's not that we just die, we're just here accidentally, it's a be crazy, but that's not the one that's crazy. That's the one that's telling you the truth. And increasingly, there are people who live their life and realize there is something more. And one of the problems with the American church these days is we're not excluding some of you for the monologue, but I think you get my point. Data more and more shows that increasingly people can't tell Christians apart from anyone else. You have the little ichthus fish on the back of your car and you're giving people the middle finger driving down the highway because you're in road rage. It's really Christian. Directly back to my prior point about the religion of secular atheism today that is so fixated on the environment. These people really believe the world is or else shut up or put our businesses out of business. If you really believe the world is coming to an end in 10 years, why aren't you marching in the streets every day on that issue? Why instead are you fighting on all these other little cultural issues? If you really believe the world is coming to an end in 10 years, why are you in defense of Planned Parenthood right now? Why aren't you out there marching in the streets on the... But why don't you reflect your core beliefs? Why don't you reflect your core beliefs? Now, here's the thing. I really believe I'm right on this. I really do. I really do believe there's a heaven and there's a hell. I really do believe there's a God. And so I should reflect my life right like that. And if I really do believe that, and I really do think I'm right, and I live my life that way, and everyone else does too who believes that, then when people start listening to the crazy little voice in their head that says there's more to this than the worms eating your body in the grave, you're not an accident, you have a purpose and a plan. Who have a purpose? Here it is. Or are they going to gravitate to the people who say, no, pay no attention to that voice? Are they going to gravitate to the people who open their eyes and say, this is the way? The Mandalorian knows there's purpose. Every child who's born develops, this doll can be a boy or a girl. I guarantee you that, one, they're not flying off the shelves, and two, when they are, they're from progressive parents trying to indoctrinate their kids who don't know what to do with them, and three, it's going to be the girls who gravitate to them, not the boys. I guarantee you that's the case. And I can guarantee you that because I know something about human nature. I know something about the way God created us, male and female. We didn't get to choose that. It is the insanity of the world that says otherwise, and it's the insanity of the world when people hear the little voice in their head and go looking for answers. They're not going to turn to the insanity that says we're all an accidental freak of nature derived from monkeys and this is all going to come to an end. Better be ready. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't.
Honest news and conservative views.
Never separated from the truth.
It's the
So Judge Judy is backing Mike Bloomberg for President of the United States. She actually befuddled Chris Cuomo on CNN. I didn't get the audio of it because the audio wasn't as it's funny the Democrats have this problem with the Democratic campaign trail. They're just not happy with the field, and he says things that have a kernel of truth in them that get Democrats upset. I mean, for example, Joe Biden had an exchange on the campaign trail the other day with a guy who explained that someone in his family had cancer, and here's Joe Biden.
During the run-up to the passage of Obamacare, President Obama promised my father that if he likes his plan, he can keep his plan, and that his insurance will be cheaper. After passage, his plan was done.
Lion, dog, face, pony shoulder. No, look, there's two ways people know when something is important. One, when it's so clear when it's passed that everybody understands it, if you wanted to necessarily. He's dead right about that.
Wait a second. Joe Biden is saying after they didn't understand it? That's Joe Biden. That's got everybody in Washington who's an Obama fan befuddled. And meanwhile,
statistics are those voters encouraged by you to find another candidate? The ones that don't have student loan debt?
You know, I just don't see it that way, John, and that's sure not what I hear from people when I'm there.
Bush were headed into the White House. The campaign was over. They were headed to Washington. They had won, and Dick Cheney began telling people we're headed into a recession. And the data was that is essentially what the Democrats are doing now. Elizabeth Warren saying that the data is not really there. That people don't really feel like the economy is doing well. There are like 5 Americans who don't have jobs right now. Everybody else is working, and income is up. People's take-home pay is up thanks to the tax cuts. And Elizabeth Warren's like, nobody I know. Who the hell is Elizabeth Warren hanging out with that she doesn't know anybody who's actually benefiting from this economy? It's striking how clueless these people have to be to try to win. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show, across the state of Georgia, across the nation on the internet. The phone number, if you would like to call in and be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Now, this is somewhat surreal, I guess. It's kind of funny to me being a Georgia focus show, only on stations in Georgia, but I have of our affiliate WCHM in Clarksville, Georgia. That's right. So those of you in Clarksville, you're getting some advertising dollars out to Albuquerque, New Mexico. But loved the last segment of the show. Let me reset the table. If you're just coming in, this is where I talk about John Bolton and impeachment. We will get there momentarily. In the last half hour of the show, I was talking about this meltdown in society right now on them that tells them so much of what we hear in society right now, the transgenderism nonsense to the fatalism in the world, that it's all a bunch of hooey. There is a voice in your head that says there's a purpose greater than this. That there is you're there for something. And I believe as a Christian are not prepared to live their lives in that way, that they reflect the world around them in the way they live their lives and the way they conduct their church services. And so when people come looking for the answers and say maybe Christianity has it, they stumble into a church or among a community of believers that really doesn't operate any differently from the rest of the world, and they become disaffected in some way. And that if you believe in this set this apart, that you have the answers to life as best they are able to be derived, then you should live your life in such a way that when those who finally hear and pay attention to the voice in their head come calling for the answer or catechism, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. Christians believe in a doctrine of vocation, that in your work you're expected to reflect your faith, that it is a ministry, your work is a ministry, you're to make disciples and believers out of all the nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whether you believe in that or not, there should be a focus in your life so that when people come calling for the answers, you can draw them in, because everybody... There are a lot of angry people who they're mad at the world, they're mad at God, they turn off the voice, they don't want to hear it anymore. They don't believe it's true because something has happened in their life and they're mad. And I know people like that. I know something happened in their life such that they have concluded if there was a God, this would not have happened. And they stop. There are way more people, I think, who come out of atheist families who believe in a God, who, even if they're agnostic, they're not Christian or Jewish or Muslim, they're just agnostic. They think maybe there is a higher power. There are a lot of people who come out of there. There are way more people who wouldn't have gotten sick. My dog wouldn't have gotten hit by a car, whatever. Some tragedy that causes it. Some of you may know who Lois Evans is. Lois Evans, she was on the National Religious Broadcasters Board. I've met her once. I did not realize she had cancer of the bile duct. She died. Her husband, Tony Evans, is a very famous minister, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas. He's got a radio show on a lot of Christian broadcasting. Her son, Jonathan, preached her funeral. And in relation to all of this that I've been talking about, this listener from Albuquerque sent this to me and said, you should play this clip. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, where when people start listening to the voice and they come looking to you for answers, listen to this.
And as I was wrestling with God, he answered. And he said, number one, you don't understand the nature of my victory. Because just because I didn't answer your prayer your way doesn't mean that I haven't already answered your prayer anyway. Because victory was already given to your mom. You don't understand. Be healed, or she was going to be healed. Either she was going to live or she was going to live. Either she was going to be with family or she was going to be with family. Either she was going to be well taken care of or she was going to be well taken care of. Victory belongs to me.
That was Jonathan Evans. His actually have the answers. They want to question everything. A secular worldview wants to question everything, but provides answers to nothing. And the reason it provides answers to nothing is because there is no truth. We're in a post-truth society, a morally relativist. Bolton. Let's get into this. I have said one of the other things I have talked about previously on this program is the left and the right's desires to have silver bullets. Or that maybe it goes back further. But the party out of power always wants us with vampires, too. I know you can use stakes with vampires. As an aside, y'all, this is so cool. I've got it on my Twitter feed. There's BBC is doing a series on Dracula in Great Britain. And if you see the billboard stakes all over the left side of the billboard, and at night as the sun goes down, a spotlight shines on the billboard from the side, and those stakes then cast the shadow of Dracula's face on the billboard. It's actually really cool marketing. I was impressed. I had to show my kids that. It was impressive. With Republicans and Obamacare, there was not so much an intellectual argument to defeat Obamacare over time. It became John Roberts is going to throw it out. It's become Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is going to defeat Donald Trump for the left. Impeachment is going to defeat Donald Trump for the left. Well, now the latest silver bullet for the Democrats is John Bolton, who says he's going to testify before the Senate. Now, as an aside, John Bolton has decided he will testify if he is subpoenaed. That's the key here. If he is subpoenaed, he will testify. Why don't the House Democrats reopen impeachment? They're part of the same entity. So if a subpoena from one he'll honor, he's got to now honor one from the other. And he knows that. John Bolton is a smart guy. He knows that. And the fact that the Democrats did not subpoena him before filing articles of impeachment is a pretty big red flag. Now, listen to Don Lemon last night on CNN about John Bolton.
Bolton threw a monkey wrench into the whole thing with his surprise announcement that he's willing to testify in the impeachment trial if he is subpoenaed. Could have done it without a subpoena, but anyway, he says he's willing, so let's take him at his word. You may remember that Bolton blasted what he called a drug deal cooked up, something Mitch McConnell is refusing to do.
So the Democrats in the House could do it. They could reopen impeachment, and they could subpoena John Bolton did. John Bolton's a smart man. John Bolton is a Republican and a conservative, and he despises the Democrats. And the president, in killing Qasem Soleimani, has done one of the things John Bolton has long advocated. Do you really believe that John Bolton, who is smarter than probably 99% of Congress, Republican and Democrat alike, do you really believe the Democrats are convinced that he will? The Democrats were convinced that Robert Mueller would. The Democrats were convinced that the Senate Republicans would betray Mitch McConnell. Turns out that the Senate Republicans, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and even Mitt Romney are all saying they're not going to subpoena witnesses. That they're not going to call people who the House should have interviewed and did not, like John Bolton. Mitt Romney came out and said, yeah, we should hear from John Bolton, but the House never heard from him. We're not going to introduce new witnesses at a trial. And yet the Democrats are like, this is the silver bullet. John Bolton's the silver bullet. John Bolton is going to take out Donald Trump. Donald Trump. He's not going to do it. And it's not that he's incapable. That's the thing here. I'm not saying John Bolton is incapable of doing it. I'm saying that John Bolton has no will to do it. John Bolton has no desire to do it. John Bolton is more with Trump than with the Democrats. And we've now got Democrats.
About the situation in Iran, what the Secretary of State claimed. He said not acting, not taking Soleimani out, that the consequences would have been worse than not acting. So far, from what you've learned, what do you believe was the right call here?
Look, we are not safer because Donald Trump had Soleimani killed. We are much closer to the edge of war.
Yeah, right. No, actually, that's not true, and no objective analyst out there actually thinks that that's true. But it's crazy. Again, I played this in the first hour. Here are the Democrats attacking Donald Trump for taking out Soleimani.
Tragically,
almost every previous foreign policy endeavor, this one is the most dangerous of all.
We are not safer today than we were before Donald Trump acted.
We seem to have accomplished what Soleimani was trying to do but couldn't. So in death, he's actually accomplished his goal.
Taking out a bad guy is not a good idea unless you are ready for what comes next.
This is and was
all to take out the guy John Bolton wanted taken out, and he's going to help the Democrats. Do you really believe that's going to be the case? Here's what I have said, and I've said this consistently on this program. I have always thought Bolton was going to set it up for the president. And I am doubling down on this now. It sounded like a drug deal. It was John Bolton's people who released those things. The president fires him, blows up at him on social media. Conservatives attack him, and here comes the stash. And he testifies. And he backs up the president and destroys impeachment. That's what John Bolton would do. That's what John Bolton would do. John Bolton would. Now, keep in mind, it has nothing to do with Soleimani. Don't hear me say he would only do this because of what the president did with Soleimani. No, I'm saying his worldview is aligned with Donald Trump such that he would not help the Democrats. And if he had any doubts about it, the last week of the Democrats condemning the president for taking out Soleimani, left-wing fan fiction is John Bolton, the guy who takes out the president. But that's all we've got in the media these days is left-wing fan fiction.
Politics, news, religion. Erick Erickson talks about all the things you're not supposed to talk about.
Hello there. The phone number here is, what is our phone number? 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I need more coffee. Kelly Loeffler is now the United States Senator from Georgia. She was sworn in late yesterday by Vice President Pence. I texted her a note of congratulations. We're going to try to get her win next week. Yes, next week, next Friday, I will have Governor Kemp for the entirety record the interview. Just full disclosure here, we're going to record the interview on the 16th, right after he's given the State of the State speech. One of the things that he wants to do is crack down on gang. Was being on the city council in Macon, Georgia. I mean, honest to goodness, people, local politics is far nastier than anything at the national level. You know, behind the scenes, conservatives and liberals in Congress, a lot of them actually do get along very well. I've got a friend of mine who is as the Democrats would call him, a mouth-breathing conservative, and he actually gets along very well with AOC. He says she's very nice. They just disagree on politics, but they're kind of in it together in the swamp of Washington that neither of them likes, and they get along fairly well. And I hear this all the time, but local politics is just, it's ruthless because you get people who yell at you in the grocery store if their trash wasn't collected. That literally happened to me one time. Someone was mad at me because their trash, and I find this very funny because I have, in the last couple of years, have called my city councilman on several occasions because my trash hasn't gotten picked up. The difference was I actually rolled my trash can to the freaking curb. This person is yelling at me because a special trip back to their house because, after all, by God, they're a taxpayer. I got yelled at in my front yard one time by my across-the-street neighbor who was just nuts because he didn't like something I had said in City. It was a horrible job, and it was part-time. I actually had to give it up a few months earlier. I was fine, good, done. It was terrible. But prior to me having gotten elected, we had a former mayor who just decided there was no gang problem. And apparently, if you believe that there's a gang problem in Georgia, some people believe you are racist. On crime. We're going to talk about it next week, among other things. But just to give you a perspective of what we dealt with here, there's a story in WMAZ in Macon, Georgia, that the 1,600 people were shot in Chicago in 2019. 139 were shot in Bibb County. Population-wise, though,
15.
We do have a problem. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the state of Georgia. The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97.
Hey, Eric. So I appreciate that some time ago you were able to give a perspective on that pallet of cash that Iran was given. Something about it actually being their money.
Yes.
And the frustrating thing about it is regimes that are going to commit acts of violence against us or the world, but it's not quite the way it was, is it?
No, it's not. So, Jeff, here's the breakdown of it. In bank accounts, not in Iran. They were in Europe and the United States. And when the Iranian revolutionaries took over, all of that money was frozen by those countries. Now, under international law, if you freeze another country's money, you still have to earn interest on the money. You can't. That Iranian money, billions of dollars, has been sitting in interest-bearing accounts since 1979. And the total number wound up being somewhere between 125 on the high side, being about $155 billion. But once Iran had actually paid off all of its obligations, it had outstanding war. The Central Bank of Iran actually said it was $32 billion it wound up with, not 150. But the idea that we sent them American money bearing interest since 1979, and we took out a bunch of money for debts that they owed before we sent it to them. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I remember that you said that before. It's just a little disheartening that here's the pallet of cash. And I don't even know why the Obama administration would not have gone to the trouble. It's always potentially a lie in some dimension.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, one of my frustrations with both sides doing it is I really do think we have an obligation. The reason that the Obama administration didn't want to explain it, and the reason they didn't go aggressively to defend it, it goes back to the John Kerry interview with CNBC in 2015. Because it was Iran's money, we could put strings attached to it. And so Kerry had to admit in the CNBC interview that, a lot of that $32 to $55 billion that are that, so they weren't really going to defend it. That's the problem with the truth of the story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay.
Yep, glad to help you there.
Thanks for the explanation.
425. And again, it is a fact. It is a documented fact. We were sending Iran their own money that has been left in bank accounts since the Shah fell. We did not send them American. The only thing that we could do is Iran had international obligations under the same finance treaties that required them to make these accounts interest-bearing while the money was locked up and away from them. But the Obama administration wasn't going to defend it because the Obama administration would have to defend Iran giving that money to terror groups. That if the God I believe in is the way and the truth, then I've got an obligation to the truth. And the obligation to the truth is the obligation at different conclusions. There are a lot of Democrats who look at this and they say that the Obama deal was a good thing, even acknowledging that the Iranians sent that $55 billion to terror groups. But that's part of the truth. It's still part of the truth. Wilton, calling from Macon, Georgia. Welcome.
Thanks for taking the call.
Sure.
I just listened to the answer that you gave the previous call. There was a lot of cost involved in the amount of damage they did to the embassy, the compensation for the hostage sale for 444 days, which incidentally, one of those guys went to MSG school with my brother. Had been in Iran about 24 hours. But the fact that we even gave it to them every single day, kept that money. We should have kept that money for Iran.
Look, I totally agree with you. Now, just so you understand here, in part, we sent them $155 billion, and people who had been killed in terrorist attacks by Iranian sponsorship and all that. Frankly, we should have never sent them a penny of it.
Absolutely. That you and I will agree on that.
Yeah, we tracked out $100 billion to pay for victims of terror, to pay for a replacement of the. Now, this is actually one of the funniest things. You and I can laugh over this, Wilton. Is you do have to give to the Obama administration. They did make the Iranians pay for the cost of the American embassy in Iran that we no longer use. But still, we gave them $55 billion that they used for terrorists. We should have never done that.
Absolutely agree, man. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. Y'all, seriously, it was such a terrible deal. And the Obama administration, again, yesterday, if you weren't here for the first hour, Yesterday on CNN, 13 Obama administration officials were used by CNN to discuss what President Trump had done. Unobjective, they were treated as objective analysts. They all worked for the Obama administration. They all supported the Iran deal, and they all thought it was undermining Obama's legacy for Trump to do what he did. Obama gave $55 billion to the Republic of Iran to use against Americans. Every single American soldier who's been killed in Iraq with an IED in the last number of years, those IEDs were used built with the money that Obama gave to Iran. Don't you forget that. It's ridiculous that we did this. It really, really, really is ridiculous that Obama did this. And note that he never went through Congress to do it because he couldn't get Democrats in the Senate to ratify the treaty. All of these Democrats who are complaining about Donald Trump upending the Iran deal, it was the Democrats who upended the Iran deal because they couldn't get a freaking treaty passed through the United States Senate. So Obama had to do it unilaterally, and they rushed to get the money out of the United States as quick as possible in case Hillary Clinton as president or Donald Trump, God forbid, got elected and stopped the deal. But let's not the Shah of Iran's money, and we returned it. We never should have, but it was their money. Now, Mike in Clarksville, welcome to the program. Mike, how are you?
Thank you much, Eric. I appreciate you standing for the truth.
Thank you.
My question is, will you ask Governor Kemp to have Georgia become a Second Amendment sanctuary state?
Man, I know he's got some, one of the things he has told me he wants to talk about is he's got some gun initiatives he wants that will, dare I say, liberalize gun laws in Georgia. Mike, I is in real time way too accessible to you people. But, you know, it keeps you on your toes. It keeps me on my toes of how we steer the show and the stuff we talk about. You never know. That's why you got to listen. You never know what I'm going to talk about or what I'm going to say on something. Some of you, my wife, just so you understand, this is a lot of guns. My wife has more guns than me. And she is on a lot of gun emails, Second Amendment emails and Facebook groups. And everyone is losing their freaking mind over what's happening in Virginia. And I need to explain this to all of you, and I don't mean to offend any of you. It's become corrupt and is not good. I'm a huge fan of Georgia Carey. I am a huge fan of Gun Owners of America. I think both of those organizations do much better than the NRA. But as the NRA has declined, there are a number of groups that have fired up, some of which are actually left-wing groups posing as Second Amendment groups. And there are others out there that are just grifters, and they're trying to take advantage of you. Here's what's happened. Democrat Ralph Northam is the governor. There are a series of pieces of legislation that they intend to file. One would be to restrict the purchase of guns to 1 gun a month. Another would be to cap the size of magazines to 10 rounds in a gun, which is fairly standard. That are larger than that, they want to ban those. They want to do deeper background checks to be able to buy a gun. Those are the 3 big ones. But there are some radical Democrats who have gotten elected in Virginia, and they have drafted legislation. I saw one yesterday, actually, one specifically designed to target the NRA because the NRA is the only entity in Virginia that operates a gun range in a building that has more than 50 people working in it. It is specifically designed. Therefore, it would be unconstitutional. It would be a bill of attainder, I would think. But there's another piece of legislation that would outlaw people to hand in their guns for fair market value. The state of Virginia would engage in a legal buyback program where they would ban guns in Virginia, but they would have to compensate you for them. And these gun rights groups are fundraising off of this. Look, Virginia's going to ban guns. They're going to do a mandatory buyback in Virginia. Democratic leadership in Virginia doesn't want it. And the only reason you're hearing about it is there are some grifting groups out there who have taken advantage of the decline and fall of the NRA to try to prop themselves up by scaring the crap out of you about Second Amendment issues. Did you know there's a bill in the Georgia legislature? It's pending right now. There is a bill in the Georgia legislature that would prohibit the sale of semi-automatic weapons in Georgia. You can only do single-shot guns for sale in Georgia. And anyone who owns semi-automatic, state of Georgia right now, it would ban the sale of semi-automatic weapons and force you to sell your guns back to the state whether or not you wanted to. That legislation is there. Do you know why you're not hearing about it? Because it has no chance of passing. And Georgia is a state controlled by Republicans. And if it ever did accidentally pass, got slipped through in the moment, in the night when no one was looking, Governor. And we're hearing so much about that. Now, a bunch of municipalities in Virginia have, in fact, become sanctuary cities, where essentially they're saying, we're not going, if any of these gun restrictions pass, we're not going to honor them. We're not going to take your guns. We're not going to legislation that really doesn't have a chance of passing in the Virginia legislature. And you can say, Erickson, how do you know? Because I pay attention to politics. I've done politics for a living. I understand that in Virginia, there are enough people in the suburbs who don't like Republicans and voted Democrat, but do love their guns, that the Democrats are smart enough to know they can't get this legislation passed. They're not going to try fundraisers off of these pieces of legislation. It's all the startup grifting gun rights groups that are just taking advantage of you. So be careful where you send your money. Speaking of sending money, this show today is sponsored by First Liberty of Georgia. If you are a business, if you run a business, if you are in charge of the finances of a business and you want to grow your business, First Liberty of Georgia, they're out of Noonan. They're a good company. If your listening family makes their own lending decisions, they can help you get access to capital without a bank bureaucracy. If you want to grow your business and you're thinking at the start of this year that you need loans, go to First Liberty of Georgia. Interest rates are great right now, by the way. Go to firstlibertyga.com. That's their website. Talk to the Frost family. Tell them I sent you. Support this show. We have very limited sponsors. We're trying to get more advertisers to keep it going. I pay for most of this out of my pocket. But First Liberty stepped up and helped me, and I want to help them. And if your business wants to grow this year and you need loans to do it, you need access to capital, First Liberty.
As both sides target Georgia for 2020.